Hello, everyone. We are back for our first session of the day. I'm super excited for this conversation. Gustave, I'm going to hand it right over to you to take us away so you have the full time for Ready to Scale, launching and growing international communities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gustave, and I'm very happy to be talking today about a topic that's dear to my heart. Before I start, I'd like to apologize for my voice. I'm currently in New York, and I'm probably one of the only people that managed to catch a cold end of May when it's really hot and humid here. So my voice might crack a little bit, but I hope you can still understand me through the accent and the crackled voice. So today I'll be quickly going, into who I am, but most importantly, talking about the importance of international communities and why it's important. Then I'll dive into my personal experience and what I'm currently tackling with my team at Reddit. And finally, before questions and answers, sharing some tips for scaling your communities with local community members. And I'm really planning on keeping 5 to 10 minutes for the questions, as I believe this is the most valuable part, and I'm looking forward to exchanging with you all. So why am I sharing who I am? I think it's important because community managers in Europe are quite rare, and I just want to show that we can still do it when we're in Europe. And the industry is growing in Europe as well, and it's very exciting to see. I remember a few years ago when I joined the community club, it was the first time that I saw anything, resembling an industry, and I was very excited about it. So I'm from France. You might hear it from the accent, maybe not. I have a very international upbringing, and I've been working at Reddit since for 9 months now, essentially heading the community launches internationally with the community team here at Reddit. So why international communities? Why do I want to talk about this today, and why is it important for you? Most of you probably have English-speaking communities, and we all have different types of communities. SaaS, user base. I mean, I'm working on social networks, and they all have different parameters. But while you're focusing your community on a product or on a certain interest, the language might be English because that's a global language. You will see that organically, you're starting to get people from other countries or people even in your country that are not native English speakers, and therefore it's important to address that, to acknowledge that all your users are not from the same country, from the same culture. And as most of us, will see in our career, community growth can be, very random, very organic, and that can lead to an international audience, which is, a huge opportunity that you can seize to grow your communities at scale. Now, of course, international also means that it's not local, not national to your own country or to your own culture. And therefore, that can also be a barrier to growth. For example, if your community is focused on, a very specific topic for American users or customers, and then suddenly, you start growing, let's say, in Mexico with English-speaking users there as well. The way you communicate, the way the community, is engaging with itself, might be very US-centered. I'm using US as an example, but it can be any country. But these are little things. I mean, you have obvious ones, right? Like sharing, time zones, sensitive topics, talking with like in a native lingo, but can also be the way you engage with your communities. Some cultures, are a lot more reserved or a lot less direct. And that can also be a barrier to your community growing internationally. And finally, one topic that's, I think, is probably one of the most important things when you're growing a community, international, local, or any kind of community, is the authenticity of that community engagement. We are here to manufacture and create, a community for people to find, common interests and topics and being able to engage around those topics. But when we are trying to, to kickstart an engagement or maintain an engagement, it's very difficult, also extremely important that we keep the authenticity, at heart of everything we do. And what do I mean by authenticity? I mean, keeping it real. That's basically that's the baseline. Making sure that you're not faking too much of the content, of the engagement, because users, customers, anyone in the community will see through that, and people will be naturally a lot more engaged when the community feels authentic, when it feels real, when it feels like, okay, the added value is not some brand just pushing something down my throat, but it's actually the community of users, customers, and also employees from the company getting together and really helping each other. Might sound a bit kitschy, but as you all know, community, sometimes we talk about things that sound very rosy, and I think it's also because it matters. And you'll see also, I mean, for international communities, it's extremely important that this authenticity is transmitted across, the engagement in your communities. Now, I'd also like to talk about a term that they call Glocal. So it's essentially global and local together. And what do I mean by this? I mean communities where we have the international community. So imagine English-speaking community on Slack where people talk about a product, but then addressing the fact that some of your users might not be native English speakers, that they might be in countries where the business language is not English, and therefore there is potential for developing a more local approach for these users as your community grow. And I think this is like a big untapped potential for community expansion, across all the industries. Essentially making use of, your big English-speaking community, but addressing and the fact that there are users there that might be more comfortable speaking, in the local language or with local expertise, and therefore giving them a space for that. So having a global community, but within that, also giving the option for users to find their local like sub-communities or Slack channel or however your community is. And in order to do so, you need to make sure that you localize as much as you can. And I think localize is something that I will keep hammering on today. Localizing is extremely important. Most of the internet is in English. There's a big cultural aspect to it. And while users who speak English, are used to that, there's still, a way to attract more of them if you can localize that content or that engagement for those users. Similarly, giving them a unique, value proposition. You might be the only community proposing this globally, you might not be, but if you propose, a local aspect as well as a global one, that's another competitive edge that you might have against your competitors, or to attract more users that might not be comfortable with English. And finally, again, using that international community, to springboard growth locally by just starting to put seeds and see, whether you actually have enough locally, engaged users to create that localized community. So now I'd like to quickly talk about Reddit. I'm not sure whether all of you have heard about Reddit. Reddit is a social network. It's essentially a community of communities. It's a platform providing, the space for users to create and engage with communities that are around topics of their interest. Essentially, our mission is bringing community and belonging to everyone in the world. And what I'm doing at Reddit is internationalizing, expanding globally. Reddit is one of the most visited platforms, on the internet everywhere. It's been existing since 2005. However, it's only been actively trying to grow outside of the US for the last year. So it's a very interesting challenge because we have users, we have organic growth, in the past years all over the world. But most of that content is in English. An example is in Germany last summer, we have a lot of users. It's our biggest non-English speaking market, but 90% of the German users were consuming only English content. And therefore, in order to grow, our reach across the world, we need to localize this, like the Reddit ecosystem in all of these countries, making sure that there is localized content for people to come and find their communities. So that challenge, is a very interesting one. I also wanted to show you this beautiful fresco. This is r/place. Some of you might have heard about it. What is it? Reddit is a very quirky place. We engage with our communities in a very special way. And for the last April Fool's Day, we try to troll the communities by creating this board of 1 million pixels, where as a user, you can change the color of a pixel every 5 minutes. And essentially what we wanted to see was, communities collaborating with their users and between each other in order to create some beautiful digital art. I'm sharing this with you just to show you, how international the communities have become in Reddit. Can you see the amount of flags there? What we saw was, countries grouping together the whole ecosystems, meeting and coordinating, streamers joining on board, bringing all their fans there, countries collaborating with each other, France and Germany, for example, building the EU flag, or even regions with each other. And this is a beautiful example, of the power of communities when they can collaborate with each other. Of course, it's not, in essence, what Reddit is about, but just shows, the importance of international communities across, any industry. Now, what are the best ways, or like, according to me, what are the main things to keep in mind when you're building your community growth strategy at scale internationally, but also locally? A lot of the things I'm going to talk about, will sound, obvious, but I think it's very important to mention that. So the first one, and I think this is key to any community, that you will be involved in, of course, is talking to your users, to your moderators, to your customers. And here, I mean specifically your local power users. What do I mean by local? Users are in a certain country or certain region, and power users, power customers, your most engaged customers or users, the ones that get your community and that are engaged and are helping you. These are the ones, that you should shape, your strategy around, because you need more people to be, to get the community the way they get it. And therefore, by talking with them, you get a good understanding of, what is it that makes your community so special for them, and how can you scale that to other people? Similarly, get a good picture of what's already on the local ecosystem. Local ecosystem at Reddit means, France, all the subreddits in France. But for your community, it might mean, what other online communities are there in your industry in that country? Let's see, is your value proposition already, tackled by other communities? Or if you already have local users on your ecosystem, what do they mostly engage with? Or what do they engage with in your international English-speaking community that could, work in your local language? So basically looking at low-hanging fruits in local markets. And believe me, every country, has quite distinctive things that you can easily pick at. And then finally, are there any topics that are missing in the local ecosystem? So at Reddit, that might mean, is there a subreddit for Berlin? But for example, a SaaS community, is there a SaaS community of similar to yours in that local country? Or if you already have, a local community, are the topics that your users or your power users, want to see more of, that you can, tackle and use that to drive more growth? Use data wherever possible. So as community managers, we all know it's extremely difficult a lot of the time to measure things quantitatively, but at the same time, it's the most important way to, to convey why community is important to your managers, to your executive boards, to your users even, and also to measure, any success. So whether you find a scientific way, to measure, the things you're doing, or whether it's essentially surveys, seeing how much engagement people are having within your communities, it's important to have something to use as a benchmark. Looking at retention rates, engagement KPIs is something we do a lot at Reddit. How many posts or replies are they? What percentage of users are participating? All these things. But I know that most of you are already, keeping an eye on that. Then working closely with your local power users. Previously, in the previous slide, I mentioned, talking to them, but working with them is something that's quite different. And that's also, key to scaling. If you're planning on scaling to more than one country in a short amount of time, you need to think about how you can scale your work. Community management, is very demanding. And the more distinctive communities you have, sub-communities you have in your communities, the more tiring it is. And therefore, if you can work, with your local power users or customers, you can really, enable a much quicker growth. These users are your local experts, in that community. So at Reddit, the local mods that have been on Reddit in Germany for 10 years, They are the community experts for the local market. I'm not, or my German country launcher is not. So we need to, make sure that, we work very well with them. The relationship is healthy, even hiring them, because they are well networked within the community. They can help you scale all your efforts and do experiments with you. Measuring success is the most important thing in order to get the resources you need, or in order to go, as far as you want to go. And essentially, that means, defining the goals for your programs. It should be something that's quite ambitious, but also makes sense, something that you can track, whether it's scientific or not, at least that you have methodology to measure a difference. I think something also I'd like to emphasize is just that these KPIs, these goals shouldn't be, fixated. You should adjust and iterate as you go along. You will see, signals very quickly. Can take, 2-3 weeks, but when you see something, not going right or going way too well, adjust and iterate. And that will also really dictate, how ambitious and how successful your strategy is for your programs in the long run. And finally, measuring success is important for managing your cross-functional expectations, whether you work with product or with the customer support, to show the positive impact of your actions and hopefully get a little more help and recognition and be able to put community at the forefront of your business. Collaborating with local community members is extremely important, as I mentioned, and this is key. When you work with them, make sure that they get something out of it, that it's not, a one-way street. Oftentimes when you talk with power users, they're very ecstatic to talk to you, but remember, they are humans. They are engaged right now. They love your community, but there is, a certain equilibrium to find. So make sure that you find a way to reward them, whether it's, early access to a beta feature, or, access to the CEO, or, helping them with swag, or, some kind of discounts to your product, or just hiring them as contractors or freelancers, ensures that you keep that fidelity and that you keep the local community experts on your side. Again, their local expertise is what's going to help you create a distinctive ecosystem for the local markets. I'm emphasizing again, try, fail, succeed with everything you try. The approach that I like to take is preparing several hypotheses of, okay, this, would create more growth or more engagement or things like that. Even if, your solution might not sound scalable, try them out as minimal viable, experiments where it's like, okay, let's do 2 weeks with the help of our local power users where we try, creating more posts in that sense, or let's send a push notification or these things with clear goals. And using as little resources as possible, doing it as manually as possible. But what's essential is that at the end of these experiments, you can say, okay, I have positive signal that this, is something that will work or not. And if it works, then you have, a strong message to pass on to your cross-functional stakeholders to build, whether it's a new feature, a new product, or just better events. But I think what's important is as community managers, we should always, keep that entrepreneurial spirit and just be ready to test before scaling. Because once you scale and something goes wrong, it's a bit late then to go back on your tracks. And finally, I talked about authenticity at the start, but authenticity and quality over quantity, anytime, every time. Do not spam users with content just because you need to fill the community with content. Make sure there is a just balance, between quantity and quality. Quality, so much more important than quantity. Users, customers would rather see one post of quality than 10 posts that are meh. And that's very important in retaining your users, no matter what the culture is. Here's a quick sneak peek as to some of the things that we're doing at Reddit with my team. So we launched the Community Builder program. First of all, in France and Germany. Now we're launching it in the UK, in Australia, and we're expanding more and more countries. And how are we scaling it so well? Well, essentially, it goes a bit in the sense of what I was talking about earlier. Is we identified the local community experts. So at Reddit, mods. And we hired them as community builders, as contractors, part-time. And essentially, they act as community growth consultants on our behalf to local communities, where we offer any local community the ability to get personalized support, and at the same time we put them, we make sure that we control how they look and the content strategy, adding them to all our tools. And so an example is France. We have 8 community builders there that are busy helping 30-40 communities in growing their user base, their content, their designs, their moderation tools, and we keep adding to that. And that system really works at scale because we need one person to manage these people, these community builders, and we can do that in many countries. And these community builders are local, they are experts, they know the history of the communities, they are well networked, and like this, we can make sure that we have a counterbalance from a cultural perspective, but also from just the local communities' quirky culture, I would say. With like some handbrakes if needed, or some really good ideas, or we can scale also any initiative like contacting partnership able streamers at scale, or things like that. And my vision for this kind of program where we hire local experts is that when we have subreddits or communities part of that program, we have a controlled environment where we know we are in talks with the community, with the moderators, and therefore we can use this environment. So these communities are working with us to test, to experiment, and to scale initiatives. So if you want to run experiments that need the approval of the local community, there we have it because we're working with them. And that's how we can quickly see results and then scale the successful ones there. Some other initiatives just to show that it's not all community growth. Of course, we have to work with cross-functional partners, localizing user interface, making all your surfacing tools, if you have a website more local, if you're coming from that country visiting your websites, linking English topics or communities to their local counterparts. So for Reddit, I think it's obvious, but imagine you have a Slack community, making sure that if you have a Slack channel about customer support, that somewhere in the description you mentioned that you also have a local equivalent for Spanish-speaking users or for Mexicans. And then finally, of course, targeted marketing. But that's something that we do at the end, more like, because it's more important to get the community foundation before adding a lot of people down the funnel. So now the key Reddit word. Too long didn't read. This is the last slide before questions. And if you didn't listen up to now, I think this is where you can get a quick summary of what I was talking about. Again, international communities present huge opportunities for growth, but beware of cultural pitfalls. So many companies and communities have failed there, and you can really ostracize users that are not accustomed to your local culture. Glocal and local can be a very powerful way to bridge the gap between cultures, online and offline as well. Localize, this is key, right? If you want local users, you need to localize it for them. Focus on having local expertise to really feed into your strategies and to support you. Talk to your local users and work with the most engaged ones. And finally, your strategy is not set in stone. It should continuously evolve with the reality of the ground. It's okay to change it as long as you get that growth and you get that positive signaling. And just test. Be entrepreneurial. Just get your hands dirty. Hack your way through until you find positive signals, which then indicate that you can start thinking about scalable solutions. So that's it. I'm really looking forward to your questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because I'd like to see, your questions, but I'm still here. Q&A. And Naya, can you help me sort out through the questions, please?
Hello. Okay, so we have our first one. Do you think of incentives differently for each market, especially if it involves monetary compensation?
That's a very good question. When you're expanding in several countries at once, I think it's important to keep some kind of fairness across your programs, which means, if you're launching a program in the UK and in France, that they get similar rewards, because they might be talking to each other, and if one side is earning more than the other or getting more perks than the other, then you might create some jealousy. So if you're able to pay the same or give the same awards across all markets, I would highly recommend using this uniform reward system, which might be a bit counterintuitive when I'm talking about localizing everything. Mm-hmm. But in terms of fairness, I think it's a lot more important.
Gotcha. We have another question. We've got time for one more. From Virginia Graham. For Glocal communities, how do you get a local community that communicates in, say, French to open up and reach out to the global community in English? How to get them out of their comfort zones and speaking or interacting in another language?
That can be very difficult indeed. Well, I mean, first of all, look which users in those communities, can speak English, even if they're not that comfortable. Maybe work with them to find a way to share with the rest of the communities, in a way that's comfortable, whether it's just sharing a testimonial for them, on their behalf, or just using a medium that they might feel more comfortable in, a text, or getting them to translate something. But what's important is that you really do, adjust to their needs and wants. So whether it's then being the conveyor of, what they want to talk about, or promoting them, or finding one person in a community that can speak, English, it's important to adjust and find a solution that works. But in the end, I mean, as a community manager, you're the last resort, and you can also use that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. We have like 30 seconds, and I just saw a question come into the chat. So I'll ask this one really quickly from Brooke. Do you have any tips for justifying the translation cost? I'm lucky to have thousands of people that want to get involved in my community around the world, that are willing to operate in English, but that also means struggling to justify the cost, even though I know it would make a difference.
I'm a big proponent of, hacking your way through until you can show the rest of the company that community makes sense. And, you can use your community to translate. I mean, there are probably, thousands of strings that you want to translate. The key ones, you can find power users to help you do the quick translations for what's important. So I would start there. It's better to do a little than nothing at all. Mm-hmm. And that already shows, the intention to adjust for the local needs.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. We are exactly at time. Thank you for sharing these insights, Gustave. And I know this is also one of your first speaking engagements. So thank you for joining us for that. We are very much honored. So everyone, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break before we head into our next session. I'm really excited for this panel conversation, and it actually builds really nicely off of everything that Gustave has just shared. We'll be talking about building inclusive communities. So thank you again, Gustave, and we'll be back, everyone, here in 5 minutes. See you soon.